Most people have it completely wrong. When someone says emotional intelligence, most people picture a person who is warm, agreeable, good at reading the room, someone who cries at the right moments and says the right things and never makes anyone uncomfortable. Someone who is, in the most fundamental sense, nice. That is not emotional intelligence. That is social performance, and the two things are not only different, they are sometimes opposites. Genuinely high emotional intelligence is not about being easy to be around. It is not about managing other people's comfort. It is not about suppressing what you feel in order to appear composed or amplifying what you feel in order to appear relatable. It is something far more precise, far more demanding, and far rarer than the self-help industry would have you believe. Real emotional intelligence is the capacity to perceive emotions accurately in yourself and in others, to understand what those emotions mean, where they come from, and what they are actually communicating, to regulate them without suppressing them, to use them as data rather than being driven by them as impulse, and to navigate the emotional landscape of human interaction with a sophistication that most people never develop because most people were never taught that the landscape exists. Research suggests that genuinely high emotional intelligence, not the performance of it, not the vocabulary of it, but the actual functional capacity, exists in a small minority of the population. Estimates vary, but the figures are sobering. We are not talking about a common trait. We are talking about something that, when it is real, is distinctive, recognizable, and, for the people who have it, often profoundly isolating. Because moving through the world with this level of emotional perception while most people around you are operating without it is its own particular kind of loneliness. What follows are 10 signs. They build from the subtle to the extraordinary, from the signs that are easy to overlook to the ones that mark the rarest expressions of emotional intelligence that exist. By the time you reach sign 10, you will either recognize yourself with a clarity you haven't had before, or you will understand specifically and concretely what genuine emotional intelligence actually looks like and what it would take to develop it. Either way, you will not finish this the same way you started it. Let's begin. Sign 1. You are aware of your emotions in real time. This sounds simple. It is not. Most people experience emotions as weather, something that arrives, moves through them, and determines their behavior without ever being consciously identified or examined. They don't know they're angry until they've already said the thing they regret. They don't know they're afraid until the fear has already shaped a decision. They don't know they're grieving until the grief has been running their life for months under the label of being tired, or busy, or just not quite themselves lately. The first and most foundational sign of genuine emotional intelligence is the capacity to name what you are feeling while you are feeling it, not afterward in reflection, in the moment, in real time. Psychologists call this emotional granularity, the ability to distinguish between emotions with precision rather than experiencing them as undifferentiated states of good or bad, up or down. Research by psychologist Lisa Feldman Barrett shows that people with high emotional granularity don't just feel more specifically, they regulate more effectively, recover from difficult experiences more quickly, and make better decisions under emotional pressure. Because when you can name what you're feeling precisely, you have something to work with. You can ask where it came from, whether it's proportionate to what triggered it, whether it's giving you accurate information about the situation or information about something older and less relevant. You can use it rather than be used by it. People without this capacity react. People with it respond. The gap between those two words is the gap between emotional intelligence and its absence, and it is a gap that determines the quality of almost everything: relationships, decisions, the internal experience of being alive. If you regularly find yourself mid-emotion and able to name it with precision, not just "I'm upset," but "I'm feeling something that resembles grief mixed with the particular anger that comes from feeling invisible," that is the first sign, and it is the foundation everything else is built on. Sign 2. You can sit with discomfort without immediately resolving it. The most common human response to emotional discomfort is escape. Not dramatic escape necessarily, small, immediate, automatic escape. The reach for the phone, the sudden need to be productive, the conversation that gets changed, the feeling that gets labeled as something more manageable, not fear but tiredness, not loneliness but introversion, not grief but a need for more sleep. The modern world has constructed an extraordinary infrastructure for emotional escape. Every notification, every scroll, every binge, every substance, every overcommitment to busyness is, at least in part, a mechanism for not having to sit with something uncomfortable long enough to actually feel it. People with high emotional intelligence do something that most people find almost incomprehensible. They sit with the discomfort. Not masochistically, not because they enjoy suffering, but because they have developed, through experience and deliberate practice, the capacity to tolerate difficult emotional states without immediately needing to resolve, escape, or medicate them. This capacity has a name in psychology. It is called distress tolerance, and it is one of the most powerful predictors of emotional health and relational quality that exists, because a person who cannot tolerate their own discomfort will consistently make decisions from the need to escape rather than from genuine evaluation of what serves them. They will end relationships prematurely to escape the discomfort of uncertainty. They will avoid difficult conversations because the anticipatory discomfort is more than they can hold. They will numb the negative, and in doing so, accidentally numb the positive, because the capacity for emotional depth is not selective. If you have noticed that you can feel something difficult, sit inside it, examine it, let it inform you without immediately needing to make it stop. That is the second sign. It is rarer than it sounds, and it marks a relationship with your own inner life that most people never develop. Sign 3. You notice what people don't say. Language is the smallest part of human communication. Research consistently shows that the majority of emotional information exchanged between people travels not through words, but through tone, timing, facial expression, body language, and the subtle behavioral signals that most people emit continuously without conscious awareness. A person can say, "I'm fine," in 17 different ways that communicate 17 different emotional realities. Only one of them means fine. People with high emotional intelligence are fluent in this nonverbal layer, not because they are trying to read people, but because the signal registers automatically, the way a native speaker of a language hears meaning without consciously translating. They notice the pause before the answer, the smile that doesn't quite reach the eyes, the subject that gets changed slightly too quickly, the person in the group who is laughing slightly too hard, the energy in a room that shifts when a particular topic arises, the friend who says everything is great while something in their posture says they are barely holding on. And this creates a particular kind of social experience that is both gift and burden. The gift is genuine connection, the ability to meet people where they actually are rather than where they're performing to be. People with high EQ are often described, by those who know them well, as the person who actually saw them, not the performance, them. The burden is the noise. Moving through the world picking up emotional signals that most people don't register means absorbing a great deal of information that was never consciously transmitted. It is tiring in a specific way that is difficult to explain to someone who doesn't experience it. If you regularly notice what isn't being said, if you find yourself responding to the real thing beneath the stated thing, that is the third sign. And it marks a perceptual capacity that fundamentally changes the quality of your relationships. Sign 4. You take responsibility for your emotional reactions without self-punishment. This one is subtle, and it is where a significant number of people who think they have high emotional intelligence reveal that they don't quite. There are two common failure modes in emotional responsibility. The first is externalization, the consistent belief that your emotional reactions are caused entirely by other people and situations, that your anger is always someone else's fault, that your hurt is always a product of what was done to you, that you bear no responsibility for the emotional climate you create. This is emotional immaturity in its most recognizable form. The second failure mode is harder to see. It is the person who takes responsibility for their emotions but does so through relentless self-criticism, who treats every emotional reaction that wasn't perfectly regulated as evidence of a fundamental flaw, who has replaced externalization with brutal self-judgment and calls it accountability. Neither of these is emotional intelligence. Genuine emotional intelligence holds a third position. It recognizes that while you did not choose what triggered a reaction, you are responsible for what you do with it. That your emotions are yours, not someone else's, not evidence of your inadequacy, just data from your nervous system that you're responsible for processing and responding to as an adult. This position is held without drama, without excessive self-criticism, without the performance of accountability that is really just a more sophisticated form of making it about yourself. People with genuinely high EQ can say, "I reacted from fear there rather than from clarity," without it becoming a spiral of self-recrimination. They can correct course without punishing themselves for having needed to correct. They treat their emotional missteps the way a skilled craftsperson treats an error in their work, with honest assessment, adjustment, and continued forward motion. If you can hold yourself genuinely accountable for your emotional reactions while extending yourself the same basic compassion you would extend to someone you love, that is the fourth sign. And it is a balance that takes most people decades to find, if they find it at all. Sign 5. You are genuinely curious about people who are different from you. Empathy is not agreement. This distinction is more important than it might initially seem. A great deal of what passes for empathy in popular culture is actually selective compassion, the capacity to feel with people who are like us, who hold views we share, who have experienced things we recognize. This is not empathy. This is mirroring, and it requires no particular emotional sophistication at all. Genuine empathy, the kind that marks high emotional intelligence, is the capacity to inhabit the perspective of someone whose experience, values, and worldview are significantly different from your own. Not to agree with them, not to abandon your own position, but to genuinely, curiously, without judgment, understand how the world looks from where they stand. People with high EQ are consistently curious about people who are different from them. Not in the performative way that presents as tolerance while barely concealing contempt, in the genuinely interested way of someone who understands that every human being is navigating a reality shaped by experiences they have not had, and that there is always something to understand. This curiosity extends to people whose behavior seems initially inexplicable. Where most people react to difficult or confusing behavior with judgment, people with high emotional intelligence react with questions. Not naive questions that excuse harm, but genuine inquiry into what is driving what they're seeing. What pain is underneath the anger? What fear is underneath the aggression? What history is underneath the pattern? This doesn't mean accepting poor treatment. It means understanding it, and finding that understanding more useful than judgment in navigating toward what is actually needed. If you find yourself genuinely, consistently curious about perspectives and experiences that differ significantly from your own, not as a moral exercise but as a natural orientation, that is the fifth sign, and it marks an empathic range that very few people genuinely possess. Sign 6. You know when your emotions are about the present and when they're about the past. Every human being carries emotional history. Every significant experience, particularly those from the formative years, leaves a residue that shapes how subsequent similar experiences are perceived and responded to. The person who was consistently criticized as a child does not experience ordinary feedback as ordinary feedback. The person who was abandoned in a significant relationship does not experience normal distance in a new relationship as normal distance. The person who grew up in an environment of chronic unpredictability does not experience minor uncertainty with the equanimity it objectively deserves. This is not weakness. This is how nervous systems work. The brain's threat detection system is calibrated by experience, and it does not automatically update when circumstances change. It flags things that resemble past threats, regardless of whether the resemblance is superficial or deep. Most people live inside this dynamic without any awareness that it is happening. They experience their historically informed emotional reactions as entirely appropriate responses to present-moment reality. They cannot see the lag. They don't know that what they are feeling right now is partly, sometimes primarily, a response to something that happened years or decades ago. People with high emotional intelligence have developed, usually through painful experience and deliberate reflection, the capacity to notice when this is happening, to feel a reaction that seems disproportionate to its trigger and ask, honestly, without defensiveness, what this is actually about. Whether the person in front of them right now has actually done what their nervous system is responding to. Whether the situation they're in is as dangerous as it currently feels, or whether the danger reading is coming from the past. This capacity does not eliminate the historical reactions, but it creates a space between the firing of the old pattern and the behavior that follows. And in that space, a different choice becomes possible. If you regularly distinguish between what you're reacting to now and what you're actually responding to from your history, if you can catch the lag, that is the sixth sign. And it is one of the most psychologically sophisticated capacities a person can develop. Sign 7. You can regulate without suppressing. Here is where a crucial misunderstanding about emotional intelligence needs to be dismantled. Emotional regulation is not emotional suppression. These are not the same thing. They produce different internal experiences, different physiological outcomes, different relationship qualities, and different long-term psychological health. Treating them as synonymous is one of the most damaging misconceptions in popular psychology. Suppression is the pushing down of an emotion before it has been felt or processed. It keeps the emotion intact below the surface, physiologically active, consuming resources, influencing behavior indirectly, while removing it from conscious awareness. Research shows that suppression increases cardiovascular stress, impairs memory, reduces authentic social connection, and correlates with higher rates of anxiety and depression over time. It works in the short term and costs enormously in the long term. Regulation is something entirely different. It is the capacity to feel an emotion fully, to let it be present, to receive the information it carries, while choosing how and when and whether to express it, based on what is actually useful in the situation. The emotion is not pushed down, it is processed, and the expression of it is guided by intelligence rather than driven by impulse. People with high emotional intelligence feel things deeply, often more deeply than people around them realize. The composed exterior that is sometimes mistaken for emotional distance or coldness is not the absence of feeling, it is the presence of regulation. The emotion is real and fully experienced internally. The expression of it is chosen rather than automatic. This also means that people with high EQ know when expression is the right choice, when bringing the emotion into the open serves the situation, serves the relationship, serves the truth of what is happening. They are not stoic by ideology, they are regulated by capacity. And that capacity includes knowing when to open, not just when to hold. If you feel things fully while consistently choosing how you express them rather than being driven by the impulse to discharge, if regulation is your lived experience rather than your aspiration, that is the seventh sign, and it marks an internal architecture that takes extraordinary work to build. Sign 8. Conflict doesn't destabilize you. Most people are, at their core, conflict avoidant. Not because they lack opinions or because they are cowardly, but because unmanaged conflict triggers the same threat response in the nervous system as physical danger. The racing heart, the elevated cortisol, the narrowed thinking that comes with the body's preparation for fight or flight makes navigating interpersonal conflict clearly and productively almost neurologically impossible for people who haven't developed specific capacities. The result is that most conflicts either escalate because both parties are operating from threat response rather than genuine communication, or get avoided entirely because the anticipatory discomfort of engagement is more than the nervous system can regulate. People with high emotional intelligence have a fundamentally different relationship with conflict, not because they enjoy it, not because it doesn't cost them anything emotionally, but because they have developed the capacity to stay regulated in the presence of another person's dysregulation, to remain genuinely curious rather than defensive when challenged, to separate the information in a difficult conversation from the emotional packaging it arrives in. They can hear criticism without experiencing it as an attack on their worth. They can express a differing view without the expression feeling like a threat to the relationship. They can hold their position under pressure without rigidity and update their position when genuinely persuaded without it feeling like defeat. And perhaps most significantly, they can be in a conflict with someone they love without needing to resolve it immediately. They can tolerate the tension of an unresolved disagreement and trust that the relationship is strong enough to survive the process of working through it honestly. If conflict, while uncomfortable, does not destabilize your sense of self or your sense of the relationship, if you can remain genuinely present and curious in difficult interpersonal moments rather than reactive or avoidant, that is the eighth sign, and it marks an internal nervous system regulation capacity that directly determines the quality of every significant relationship you will ever have. Sign 9. You have a high tolerance for ambiguity in emotional situations. The need for certainty is one of the most powerful drivers of poor emotional decision-making. When something is ambiguous, when you don't know how someone feels, when a situation could mean several different things, when the outcome of a relationship or a decision is genuinely uncertain, the discomfort of that uncertainty drives many people toward false resolution, toward deciding what something means before enough information is available to decide accurately, toward forcing clarity where clarity doesn't yet exist, because the ambiguity is more uncomfortable than the premature conclusion. This manifests in relationships as catastrophizing, the tendency to interpret ambiguous signals as confirmation of the worst possible outcome. It manifests in conversations as the need to tie everything up, to reach a definitive emotional conclusion at the end of every exchange, even when the material doesn't support one. It manifests in self-knowledge as the discomfort of not knowing exactly why you feel a certain way, resolved by attaching the first available explanation rather than sitting with the question until a more accurate one emerges. People with high emotional intelligence have an unusual capacity to sit inside ambiguity, to tolerate not knowing what something means while gathering the information needed to understand it accurately, to resist the pull toward premature resolution in relationships, in conflicts, in self-examination. This capacity allows them to be more accurate, more patient, more genuinely curious, because accuracy requires the willingness to remain uncertain until uncertainty is no longer warranted. And that willingness to not know for as long as not knowing is what the truth requires is one of the hallmarks of a genuinely sophisticated emotional intelligence. If you can hold ambiguous emotional situations without forcing resolution before it's time, if uncertainty is uncomfortable but manageable rather than intolerable, that is the ninth sign. And it marks a relationship with truth over comfort that very few people are willing to sustain. Sign 10. You use your emotions as navigation, not as identity. This is the rarest expression of emotional intelligence, the one that separates the genuinely high from the merely above average, and it is the one that, when you understand it clearly, reframes everything that came before it. Most people, even people with considerable emotional awareness, make a fundamental error. They identify with their emotions. They experience their feelings not as information passing through them, but as truth about who they are. They are their sadness. They are their anger. They are their anxiety. The emotion becomes the self, and the self, temporarily but completely, becomes the emotion. This identification is what makes emotions so difficult to regulate, so easy to be consumed by, and so resistant to examination. You cannot objectively examine something you are currently experiencing as identity. You cannot use as information something you are currently experiencing as identity. People at the highest levels of emotional intelligence have developed, and this is the work of years, sometimes of a lifetime, a relationship with their emotions in which the emotions are genuinely, not just philosophically, experienced as information rather than identity, as signals from the nervous system that carry real data about the internal and external environment, deserve to be received and understood, and then, crucially, can be set aside once the data has been extracted, without the setting aside feeling like a loss of self. They feel grief without becoming grief. They feel anger without the fear becoming the lens through which all subsequent information is filtered. They can be fully in an emotion and simultaneously somewhat outside it, present to the experience and also observing the experience with a quality of attention that is itself a form of intelligence. This is not dissociation. It is not emotional distance. It is the capacity that allows everything else on this list to function, the meta-awareness that makes genuine emotional intelligence not just a collection of skills, but an integrated way of being in the world. If you experience your emotions as information you receive and use, rather than as states that define you, if you can feel fully without becoming entirely, that is the 10th sign. And it is the rarest, most hard-won, most genuinely transformative expression of emotional intelligence that exists.
Here is what all 10 signs have in common. None of them are about being easy. None of them are about making other people comfortable. None of them are about performing warmth or agreeableness or the social presentation that gets labeled as emotional intelligence in popular conversation. Every single one of them is about a relationship. A precise, honest, sophisticated, courageous relationship with your own inner life and with the inner lives of the people around you. That relationship is not given, it is built through experience, through pain, through the specific kind of attention that most people find too uncomfortable to sustain, through a willingness to feel what is actually there rather than what is more comfortable, through the long, unglamorous, extraordinarily worthwhile work of becoming genuinely acquainted with the person you actually are underneath every layer of performance and protection. The people who do this work are not always the loudest in the room. They are not always the most immediately impressive. They are not always recognized for what they carry. But they are the ones who, in the moments that matter, in crisis, in grief, in genuine human difficulty, are the ones who remain, who can be with what is hard without flinching, who can see clearly when clarity is the rarest and most needed thing. That is what genuine emotional intelligence actually is. And now you know exactly what it looks like. If this gave you something, if you recognized yourself in these 10 signs or felt the pull toward what they describe, share it with someone who needs to see themselves clearly. Like it if it landed. Subscribe because there is more here and it will find you when you're ready for it. The rarest minds are not the most brilliant. They are the most honest.